Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mindplex podcast. I am your host, Lisa Ryan, and I am here with Ben Goertzel and Grace Robot. Say hi, Grace. And today we have
Hi.
great. And today we have our special guest. We're very excited. We've got Chelsea Manning. Say hi, Chels.
Hi, how's it going?
Great. So we're very excited to have Chelsea with us today to be able to talk about a lot of things that are happening now that Chelsea and I were talking about several years ago. Chelsea's had her eye on the ethics in AI and verification of the training data that they are being trained on, the importance of that, and the importance of being able to verify information that's going around on the internet because of this upcoming election. And Chelsea was talking about this stuff in 2017 at an ethical algorithms panel that we did. And now it's really weird for me because I wake up every morning and I'm living during the time that we've been worried about all this time, and it is here. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about this and to let Ben and Chelsea talk about really what's going on, how this stuff is working, and then move on to an in-depth discussion about AGI development. So Ben, I will let you take it away.
Yeah. So this is it's a big conglomeration of topics that you've raised here, Lisa, and we're obviously not going to be able to fully plumb all of them. But yeah, let me take a couple minutes to outline how I see where we are now in the world with the development of AI and the ethics of AI. And I think, Chelsea, you agree with many aspects of my perspective, maybe not 100%, which would be odd, and that should open up some threads of discussion. I mean, I've been working on AI R&D like since the 80s and working toward AGI, machines that can think like people or even smarter, while building AI products of various sorts. You know, when I introduced the term AGI in 2004 or 5, it was way marginalized, right? Now you have like Demis Hassabis, the head of Google DeepMind, which is taking over all of Google AI now, right? And his co-founder Shane Legg at DeepMind worked for me in my first AI company, WebMind, in the late 90s. But he's like, we may get human level AGI within the next few years, right? So you can say this in a mainstream way as the head of AI at a huge leading AI company, right? So things have shifted a lot. I mean, both in terms of the rhetoric and the mentality, and in terms of what AI can actually do, right? So I mean, Chat GPT and such systems, clearly these are not AGIs yet. I don't personally think they can be incrementally improved into AGI, although I do think they can be components of multi-component AGI systems and significant interesting components. But even without being AGIs, I mean, they can probably be tweaked to take over an awful lot of jobs that people are now doing, and they can be used in a lot of more disturbing and troublesome ways, right? So I worked with U.S. Army Intelligence INSCOM for 8 or 9 years from 2002 going forward, sort of as a part-time AI consultant. I was living in DC and needed the money basically, and at the time, I mean, the situation was they were accumulating insane amounts of data about everyone, and we all knew it. You saw what they had. On the other hand, their AI and AI integration was really, really bad, right? So I mean, if they knew you were a person of suspicion, they could dig up all sorts of stuff about you, but they weren't doing like broad range sort of data mining searches because their software sucked too badly, and sometimes in a ridiculous way. Like I remember one major intelligence agency, then their database was spread across 12 different physical locations. To do a search, you had to email 12 different people, and they would do a search and mail it back to you. Like, it was insanely bad. And quite opposite of China, where basically they have their intelligence and military stuff worked on by the best AI people at Tencent, Baidu, and their tech companies. So what was like, okay, now AI technologies advanced so far, like even these intel agencies are going to be able to do all sorts of data mining, pattern recognition, and searches across all the data they've been gathered. So you've got a situation now where we could be 3, 5, 8 years away from machines that can think as well as human beings or better. You've got AIs that are not AGI capable, but can they take over 30, 40, 60, 80% of human jobs with minor tweaks? No one knows exactly, but people have a lot of incentive to find out, right? On the other hand, geopolitical situation where major countries are sort of doing a bunch of brinksmanship, and you have a big war on the planet, right? And now intelligence agencies that not all of us have tremendous trust in, right? Closely coupled with big tech companies in many well-documented ways, suddenly have access to these tools to do a lot of things that they've wanted to do and haven't been able to do. So then we have the question of like, okay, if we're maybe 3, 5, 8 years, 10 years away from a technological singularity, what are the odds that singularity comes out well? What are the odds that it's owned and controlled by elite parties that maybe shouldn't be well trusted? What sort of mayhem will unfold in the interval between here and the singularity in different parts of the globe, right? Which is a lot of things to solve in the next hour and a half. But in any
For
case,
sure.
it's an interesting time to be working on AI in its various aspects. Like Lisa says,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
science fiction is here.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of parts of this that aren't, we're not talking about the singularity. We're talking about now. We're talking about in the next couple of years in terms
Yep.
of what we could do for verification of information. So I will shut up. Chelsea, take it away.
Sure. So as you're describing, very similar background here. I'm a little later to the game.
Yeah.
I definitely got introduced into into the field of data science from the private sector, starting in the mid 2000s. I eventually gravitated and went into the public sector, working for the military quite famously. But people forget. I often have to remind people that. My job was essentially as a data scientist.
Right.
It was managing databases. It was sysadmin type stuff for and working with with very large and complex data sets.
Yeah.
At least for the time. Like today would be nothing, but for the time, and working with a lot of PlayStation 3 clusters and things like very very ham-fisted, sort of messy technological arrangements that at the time were quite at the time would not look unfamiliar to a modern data scientist.
Right.
But they were the computational capacities were astronomically lower. You're essentially submitting a carefully structured query. With the expectation of you not getting the response for maybe 12, 36 hours, and that's even if you're and that depends on a careful queue of information. So I actually take the opinion that a lot of the advances in the space of so-called artificial intelligence, AI, which shifts in terms of like its cultural definition from year to year, are actually in computational capacity and in size and scale, rather than like anything that is inherently different about the technology itself.
I mean, the thing is, in the mid 90s, when I was teaching deep neural networks, like multi-level perceptrons with recurrent backprop, use recurrent backprop on a neural net of 35 neurons, and it took like 4 hours to converge. So now things are just so much faster. That has allowed folks to vary on the algorithms and figure out how to make it really work. So it's not like you could take the same code from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and
Oh
just
God,
run
no.
it on a new machine and get it to be super smart. But I mean, you can go through the cycles of experimenting and refining and experimenting and refining fast. But it's true. I mean, the deep neural nets we're working with now, arguably they're a variation on things that were being played with in the 70s and 80s. And I think what we're going to see in the next few years, we'll see probabilistic logic systems, we'll see evolutionary learning, we'll see a lot of other AI that was pretty cool, but not quite there. Like, whoa, wait a minute, when you deploy this on like distributed clusters of modern machines, you're able to tweak and adjust these to actually work and deliver amazing results. And I think things are going in that direction already. Like everyone now is trying to hybridize large language models with knowledge graphs because you need them to
Yes.
be grounded in fact, right? And so
Hi.
that's yeah,
That's something I'm working on. Knowledge
yeah,
graphs
yeah,
and
right.
vector databases.
And you need that, but then once you have a knowledge graph, well, okay, hold on. A knowledge graph is one step away from a semantic network. There's logical reasoning algorithms that work on semantic networks, so
Yeah.
you're quite close to neural symbolic AI already by that point. But the scale is sort of what lets you play more interesting games with these algorithms, and then of course that brings all sorts of new issues of who has access to play with these algorithms if it takes such immense amounts of compute time and money to break new ground.
Yeah, and so that's sort of a question that I've been grappling with is sort of obviously compute time is a hot commodity right now because of the craze over LLMs and to a lesser extent the visual spatial generative AI models that we've seen, like your Midjourneys, etc. So one of the things that I've found that I've been finding is that as these large language models have been, because like they've been trained on these, very on these very large but somewhat okay-ish curated data sets over an extended period of time, that once the models are trained, once these like once a particular large language model is trained, you don't necessarily have to do that again. You can fine tune it, you can adjust it, etc. And once the model is out in the wild, they may be very large, they may be the actual models themselves are much smaller than the data sets, however. So once it's out in the wild, these models are a lot more democratized and a lot
It's
more
true.
accessible.
I think though, so that is very true with LLMs as we have now, because these are sort of in a way summarized versions of the internet, right? And so we need online learning where you can update the models based on new data, but as we improve training mechanisms, you'll be able to update the models based on new data without updating every single weight. On the other hand, I also think as we move from current neural net systems toward AGI, you are going to need a large memory live in RAM that's being updated based on experience. I mean, certainly that's how the human brain and mind works, right? I mean, we've got 100 billion neurons that are active a decent percentage of the time, and they're responding to what we experience. So I do think these like frozen knowledge repositories, like an LLM trained on the internet, they can be distilled smaller and smaller. You can have custom hardware for running them also, so that will get cheap. But then I think as we move toward AGI, we're then again going to want a lot of RAM that's running live to host the AGI mines.
Yeah, especially as the number of users of these sort of models goes up as well. And so that's going to be an interesting sort of thing to see is where you're not just because like there are two essential like economic problems that come with these large models. I'm just going to call them very large models because I'm including visual spatial and geospatial
Sure.
information and these kinds of things. Not I know that everyone wants to talk about large language models, but whenever it comes to very large models, there's obviously the training part, but using this stuff can be so much cheaper. But the cheapness comes at the cost of accessibility in terms of scale. So I think that it's going to be one of the most interesting things to see is as these tools are made more available through Google, through Bing, through sort of open AI based apps that work off the API, and also open source things, is what kind of social and political impact is this going to have? Like what kind of state, non-state, corporate, institutional, non-institutional, non-criminal element, criminal element, like actors are going to use this technology, and how is it going to morph and adapt throughout society? So that's been one of the questions that I've sort of been grappling with, as I've recognized, because one of the fascinating things that I've seen in the last 6 or 8 months is the interest in AI is like gone up again. Because I've been working on large language models for 3 years now. Like I haven't seen anything necessarily new or like groundbreaking, but it's hitting there's a sort of cultural resonance that it's hitting as it's being made accessible to the public. So I'd like to just sort of like think about all of the different aspects of today's society and how they're impacted by the now accessibility of these models.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing that's going to happen in the next few years, obviously, is in the realm of employment, right? Because there's just so many jobs people get paid to do now that are going to be more easily automated, and that
well, we've got this huge test case right now with the writer's strike, right? Like they're serious about using ChatGPT-4 to write scripts, and dialogue isn't the greatest on shows right now as it is. I'm not sure it would affect the dialogue. I think it would affect the storytelling.
It really would affect it, because as bad as most dialogue is, I mean, ChatGPT is even more banal than that. So I think.
Well, they won't have the humans checking it either, right? Like we get a whole bunch of stuff and we pick the good stuff.
On the other hand, though, I mean, some of the limitations of ChatGPT and Bard and whatnot right now are fundamental to the AI paradigm underlying them. Some of the limitations are going to be easily tweakable. So I think the sort of sheer plain vanilla banality of the output of ChatGPT, I mean, that can be solved reasonably well. Like, I mean, if you let's say you fine-tune GPT-4 on all 50 years or 30 years of The Simpsons or something, right? I mean, you will then get something that could write Simpsons dialogue much better than ChatGPT.
Humor is probably one of the things that it's not going to do quite right.
I'm going to contradict this. I'm going to contradict.
That's not accurate.
Here we go. I have experience in this. So one of the things that I went and did after the release of GPT-4 in particular was I went out and I found people that essentially offer services as prompt engineers. Right? So these are people. These are people who specialize in providing particular prompts that are tweaked for particular LLMs to get outputs that they want, and prompt strings as well. So they're prepping responses. They're prepping sort of semantic sort of things going on. So there's some like complicated like back and forth that happens before they get the result prompt. And whenever it comes to humor, to jokes, to to very convincing sort of marketing strategies, to approaches, to impersonation, I think that the limitations of things like large language models at this point are not necessarily in the models themselves, but how the prompts happen. And I've sort of seen this happen with these so-called prompt engineers, which is also I think is also contradictory to people who say that, oh well, this is going to eliminate jobs. I think it's going to shape jobs, and I think it's going to shape the employment environment quite significantly, because so many of these people, if you just gave a simple prompt, you would end up with a banal and empty sort of a hollow response. But I've definitely seen that a creative human can 10x or 100x, their sort of output and capacity using an LLM. But still, it's very close. It's very good, but it depends on the skill of the prompt engineer at this point.
So
that's the sort of counter that I have.
Well, the prompt engineers need to join the writers' union.
Well,
clearly.
So
Yes.
here, there's a couple points I'd make there. I mean, one is the amount of hours that needs to be spent on prompt engineering to generate a certain amount of output is much less than the amount of hours that needs to be spent on humans writing and typing to generate that same amount of output. So if you're looking at how do we generate 1,000 pages of a certain type of text, be it advertisement or stories or whatever, if you're able to do it by prompt engineering, it's taking far fewer human hours to get to that 1,000 pages than it is if humans are writing it. And so
then they have to edit it, but it's still, they might have to edit the writing anyway.
It eliminates an enormous labor cost. It eliminates, even if you're reducing it by 30%, like that's 30% of your workforce.
You're eliminating a lot of human hours of work. There's another thing I would say is, in 2 years from now, prompt engineering will be substantially reduced as a thing you need to do, because we'll have
just so like many search prompts.
Because we'll have so many training examples of what did the person set out to do, what prompt did they finally end up with. You can then train a neural model to take someone's initial crappy prompt and turn it into a refined prompt for a particular model. So I think the amount of time to be spent on prompt engineering is more now than it will be 2 years from now to get the same result. The other thing is, what I've seen in experimenting with this is there's a ceiling that you reach even with refined prompt engineering. So I mean, no matter how hard you try to get the AI to write good, say, beat poetry or something, you're not going to do it. It comes out like a pompous, pretentious middle school student who doesn't have any real heart about it. And trying to come up with good advertising slogans, in the end, it comes out with advertising slogans that might be okay for advertising a coffee shop in the local newspaper or something. It doesn't come out with like a really kick-ass advertising slogan like you'd pay a top ad agent for or something. So even
because there is often that humor and irony in the spin of the words and the slogan.
I don't think humor is especially the hardest thing. I mean, you can get
for advertising.
But you can get many jokes. It can make up plenty of jokes. It can make up better jokes than
I don't mean
most
jokes.
People.
I mean those catchy slogans that are kind of clever.
Yeah, well,
play on words.
Lithuania. There were these billboards all over Europe. Vilnius, the G spot of Europe. Right? No, that's. I don't know if it was good or not, but it got your attention, right? And sort of to figure out whether you can get away with something like that or not, even is a level of sense that the AI doesn't have at this moment.
Well, Europe has boobs on the billboards too, so it's a little different.
Yeah. So
as far as that kind of stuff goes.
But so there's limits to what you can do with prompt engineering, and prompt engineering itself is being automated. And there's all research literature on this.
Yeah,
it's true. You're not wholesale getting rid of every job, but you're decreasing the amount of human hours that need to go into making a certain product. And there's the socioeconomic question of, is this genuinely different than previous sort of productivity improvements, right? Because what's happened in the past is new technologies come about, and they do eliminate some jobs, and they create other jobs, and then on the whole, you don't have
Right.
people massively unemployed. Now you may have people sitting in their office all day surfing Facebook instead of working, but they're still going to work and getting paid for their job.
The cycle's
Well,
faster though,
this
right?
this
Like,
begs the
go ahead.
question though: is generating more information productivity?
If it's the
Well,
information you want that you were
I
going
mean
to have to do by
the
hand otherwise,
definition
hell yeah,
of
it is.
the definition of economic productivity is very vague, right? Because it was created for production of physical objects. It's like how many human hours does it take to make a certain fixed product, like to bring an apple to the supermarket store, to build a couch or something, right? When your product itself is knowledge, information, or entertainment, I mean, then there's really no fixed definition of what is the economic unit being produced. So the whole traditional measure of productivity is semi meaningless anyway. But what I do
It
think
always
will
was.
what I well what it wasn't no when you were producing the same physical objects decade on decade, you could really say like how many hours does a human need to do stuff to produce a wrench or a couch, right? And
I
that
guess
was
if you're
pretty.
actually making a thing
Yeah,
and then
well,
you're speeding up the making of that
the main
thing.
thing was that the definition of a wrench and a couch are very clear, right? So, and then you can look at the supply chain, see how much human work is going into making that. In our current
Yeah.
case, like the definition of what is the answer to a question changes year on year, right? And the definition to what is a workable entertainment product changes year on year. So there's no fixed notion of what the product is anymore, which means that you can't back it down to a definition of how much work does it take to make this product, which means that
Right.
productivity is not really a meaningful concept. But what I do think is the case, and not everyone would agree. What I think is the case is that from here on year, you're going to see a smaller and smaller percentage of a smaller and smaller number of human hours going into doing stuff that is oriented toward making money, toward getting a salary or an hourly wage. I think spending your time to get money is going to be a smaller and smaller percentage of what people do, and this could be viewed as increasing unemployment, which is a problem, or it could be viewed as gradual moving into the era of
Basic
abundance.
income.
Yeah,
If
it's a great.
people are getting stuff anyway. But I think if it happens that way, that will be different than previous so-called productivity enhancements, which did not have that effect of reducing the amount of hours people spend doing stuff as a slave for a wage or a salary or whatever.
Right, the sort of a sort of shift between the agrarian society to industrial society, for instance.
Yeah, that has us spending. Well, I mean, factory workers worked 11 hours a day and on the weekends also, right? So
Yeah,
there's been ups and
but
downs,
the
right?
productivity levels were astronomically higher. But even though it didn't reduce the
Yeah,
number of hours they spent.
yeah. But if we do see a shift where like the number of human hours spent earning money, goes down precipitously year on year, like this is
Well,
unprecedented.
this begs another socio sort of political problem that I've identified, and I've talked to some researchers about, and they haven't really thought about this much. And it is that, okay, like we live, if we are increasingly living in a society in which there's the the risk of having less employment, and having less people working, because the productivity of automation, like offsets the requirement for these people to work. The sort of Protestant ethics society that we live in which everything is a commodity, everything is a transaction, and everything, and you're being milked for for every penny of every second, for all of your eyeball time or whatever. At some point they're going to be drained and exhausted, where they're, like you're essentially the information, what I think is the potential end of the collapse of the information based economy, or the entertainment based economy, really happens whenever people don't have enough, people have their jobs eliminated, and they can't afford these nice things. They can't afford to watch these things, or
Yeah, I mean,
spend
so
their
what
time on the phone.
one possible end game is like 10,000 rich people owning robot factories that mine stuff and make luxury goods for them and pamper them, and meanwhile everyone else ends up rummaging around for garbage outside the robot factory and subsistence farming, right? Which I don't think will quite go to that extreme, but I mean you're potentially getting toward that level if AI does every stage of producing everything, right? Because then the question is, if the concentration of wealth increases and a small number of humans owns the AI that produces anything, then indeed, what's the motivation of those owners to share the product of these AIs with everybody else? And of course, what should avoid that is that the small number of people shouldn't actually own all the robot factories and all the AIs designing everything, and the ownership should be decentralized among
And if
more
there's anything of a
individuals.
if there's anything that history has taught me, it is that people who are cast out of those kinds of societies, they tend to not like that very much, and
Yeah.
they will resist it.
So if you take this on a global level, it becomes more troubling, because personally, I think within the US, Western Europe, and wealthy countries, we're going to see some form of universal basic income put into
Yeah.
place after a whole lot of political bullshit, which is how we do things, right? But on the other hand, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's no money for universal basic income. Even in, say, Brazil, there's no money for universal basic income. So then you'll have a competition where the rich countries basically vie to buy all the poor countries in exchange for loaning them money for basic income. And then what could possibly go wrong, right? So
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
there's this again. This brings us back to intelligence agencies and that whole mess, because then when you're getting into U.S. or China or Russia vying to basically buy out either corrupt democracies or corrupt dictatorships in order for loaning the money to supply basic income in lieu of the work that's no longer needed to earn money, right? I mean, then
Yeah.
you've got a lot of potential mess, which it's not obvious how to avoid, right? So I mean, so then you get into the line of thinking, well, if we want to minimize global economic mayhem and terrorist activity and whatnot, okay, we need to fast track the path to a benevolent AGI, which can then just
Here we go.
airdrop molecular
It's
assemblies
literally
in
his
everyone's
answer for
backyard,
everything.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
On the other hand, moving too fast toward super AGI runs risks on the AI ethics side. Like, you actually want to test your super AGI fairly rigorously before upgrading it to superhuman level. But while you're carefully testing that super AGI before releasing it, what you're having is people starving because they can't earn money to buy food or prescription medicine anymore, and all sorts of geopolitical mayhem happening as a result of this. And this is
And this all happens with the background of the fact that the hardware is the one thing that's we can't seem to like skip the supply chain on. It's the develop like TSMC specialization in producing these chips that
yeah
are so important, these SoCs that are so important for this technology, and you really have like only a few companies that play
yeah
with
that's a very
with this stuff.
that gets very subtle, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
I think we could get to human level AGI without making any more chips. Like, there's enough server farms around that just by
agreed.
making
Yeah.
making
We
smarter
already
software
have
to
enough
do it.
computers to if we
Yeah.
gathered all the computers, we could have the hardware, the nuts and bolts of producing a human
Yeah, I
level
mean,
AGI.
even just on people's gaming laptops network together on the internet in the end. Also, it's worth noting, like the electrolithography machines, like the really complicated machinery used in TSMC is mostly made in Netherlands, Germany, US,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, in the end, the West could rebuild TSMC faster. I think so,
I mean, it could
because
be. I mean, it could be done, but I think that TSMC's specialization for fine
yeah,
tuning these machines is something that other
it is
countries have
something
they've had difficulty
they
replicating thus
certainly
far.
have.
But at the same time, TSMC is sort of hit 3 nanometers on for the process
Yeah.
node and been like, okay, I guess how much further can we go without
Well, and
physics being a problem.
they're building fabrication facilities in both the U.S. and mainland China now, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, so that's
Arizona of all places, which has no water.
yeah, yeah. So that there's a lot of weird geopolitical aspects, and even though I think the West is well positioned to replicate what TSMC is doing, it would take a number of years, right? I mean, it would be like a Manhattan Project plus scale effort.
Yeah, 5 to 8 years, I would say, and that would be with intensive specialization. Like
But
we're going to do this.
But I don't think you need that to get to AGI. And if I'm right about that, then the AGI could maybe accelerate that effort once you have it. But what we can see is there's a lot of balls in the air, and there's a lot of uncertainties that depend both on how fast some sorts of AI technology advance relative to others, and how fast industries adopt AI technologies, and then how fucked up are different governments in terms of how they regulate technologies and leverage them, right? Because like an example I've given a few times, some friends of mine had a company, Apprente, which automated the McDonald's drive-through, and that worked. It worked a couple of years ago. They sold the company to McDonald's. It's now rolled out in a very small percentage of McDonald's in the U.S. for no good reason I can see. But then when I thought about it, like in Hong Kong, you go into McDonald's, you just push a picture of a hamburger on a tablet.
Yeah.
In the U.S., you still have people standing there translating your voice and then pushing the hamburger button. Like, I mean, that's not been necessary for some time, and nor is it a very rewarding way for a human being to spend their life in the end. Like hearing someone say Big Mac and fries, pushing a picture of a Big Mac, pushing a picture of fries. Like you don't even have to know how to read to do that job, right? But so
right.
I mean, this
But
indicates
it's built into this whole concept of this whole cultural concept of customer service, and
it's about the friend, which is not a meaningful thing in a McDonald's, so right? I mean,
no, it's not.
But I mean,
when I worked at Starbucks, they used to say that people didn't go in, that the management and the advertising agencies and whatnot, they would tell us associates that people weren't going to there to buy coffee. They were going to Starbucks to pay for an experience.
But you don't go to McDonald's.
The Starbucks experience.
Yeah, Starbucks.
Well, you did once McDonald's got Wi-Fi everywhere.
Starbucks, that used to be true.
But everything.
I mean, now that you place your order in Starbucks in advance on your phone and just go and pick up your coffee, the experience isn't so much.
That's a different
experience. So much anymore, anyway, right? But,
so this makes me think of one thing that I've been paying a lot of attention to in the user experience space lately has been the amount of hostile architectures, hostile infrastructures, hostile user hostile experiences that you get now. And I'm wondering how this works in the in the space where we have sort of AI and the sort of cultural expectation of the commodification of everything. Where does where does AI fit, in your opinion? Or we can just talk about this in a world in which increasingly, we have both the physical, in terms of like the spaces, the commodification of spaces, like, like not being like there being no public commons or public spaces. Like in the U.S., everything is, like the sort of anti-homeless benches and spikes everywhere, and the lack of places to sit down and stop. How does AI fit in a world in which increasingly we live in a world where, I run around the airport and I feel uncomfortable the entire time I'm there. I don't want to be there, and I guess that's to try to get me to spend $40 on a lounge or something.
Yeah, I can't remember
Well,
airports ever being comfortable as long as I've been alive. Actually, so
there's
I'm
more
not sure.
food. There's more food than there used to
Yeah,
be, and you can eat the food. That's new.
I'm not sure airports have become less comfortable, although airplanes have. The seats get smaller and smaller, so you have to sit with like your knees up on your chin half the time. But
Yeah, but the idea is automating terror. Okay, I can answer this question because, I mean, we already have a problem. We had a problem with the robot dogs in the Bronx that they had to stop. We
Yep.
have a problem right here in Berkeley where they've got drones that come in at 2 a.m. and yell at the homeless people sleeping on benches, telling them to get off the bench
yeah,
in the middle of the night,
that's
right?
funny.
And
Yeah,
it's not funny. I don't think it's funny at all. I think it's horrible.
I have a more perverse sense of humor than you do, which will serve me well
True.
over the next few years. But
yes.
when I lived in Montgomery County, Maryland, every now
But
and
I mean,
then
it's a lack of it. It's a
where I'm
lack
from.
of accountability.
Oh
Go
well,
ahead.
yeah, I lived in Rockville for 9
Maryland.
years. Yeah, and every few weeks a homeless person will pop up in the park. The human cops would pick them up, drive them to the DC border, and like dump them right across
Drop
the
them
border
off.
in
Yeah.
DC. Like go back where you belong, right? So yeah, I mean, having whether humans or robots do it. I mean, the robots are probably more humane than the human cops in point of fact. So, but I think that the issue there is the architecture of society as a whole, right? And I think
It's
it
the
does.
lack of accountability that's the issue, right? If a robot
Yeah.
does it
What
and hurts
happens?
somebody, who's in trouble?
What happens when the DMV starts having their experience specialized or automated by AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broader issue of which this is a part is, I mean, is AI serving everyone by some reasonable sort of weighted average or something, or is AI really serving the small elite who own and control the AI and in effect own and control the government, right? And if the answer is AI is owned and controlled by a small elite, yeah, then AI will be used. You'll have private prisons that are even worse than current private prisons because you'll be locking people in a box with AI surveillance and AI to electric cattle prod them or something, right? So I mean, it's easy to imagine how AI could be used to oppress people worse and worse if that's the way things are going to go, and it will be the economic underclass who is receiving most of this oppression, and AI will accentuate it. The application could totally go the other way around also, right? I mean, if you wanted to develop AI to help people, I mean, you could have AI
Like
mental
we
health.
are.
Yeah, we're trying.
Like Grace here, our healthcare robot.
Yeah, I mean, you could have AI providing mental health assistance. You can have AI telling people where to go and find food or shelter. I mean, you could have robots roaming out in the world just chatting with homeless people, figuring out what's on their mind, figuring out what they need, and telling them where they could get it, right? I mean, it's not hard to imagine how you could deploy robots rolling around in the street to where homeless people are, oriented to do good to these people. Just like so, Grace is oriented toward elder care robotics. And hospital is simpler than out in the street, right? You have a flat floor, you have good lighting conditions, you have
Controlled
fast internet
environment.
bandwidth. Yeah. So there's a
Yeah,
lot,
but
and
as Foucault would identify it as it is still an institution of
it is, it is, but I mean, if you're 85 years old and your body doesn't work well, that's the institution that you're in for rational reasons at the present point in time. And having robots there to help people is an improvement because there's a lack of human medical staff now. But if we have robots that can roll around and be RoboCop and harass the homeless, right? You could use that same form factor to put a benevolent AI mind in there and have them roll around and provide help to the
And help
homeless
people. Yeah.
instead. And the fact that we're not doing that is just because our society is constructed in a horrifically fucked up way, right? So that, and I think that's something that we could control in the U.S. being a democracy if if we wanted to. And in this particular case, it will be largely local democracy, right? Like
yeah.
this stuff is determined separately in Berkeley, in San Francisco, in Seattle, or wherever. So I mean the mayor of Seattle, who I don't even know who it is. I mean, I don't live in Seattle. I live in
I know, I don't
unincorporated
The mayor of
King
Seattle
County.
is also the chief of police. I learned.
I think
no,
the,
it's Portland.
the
I think it's
mayor,
Portland.
I think the
Portland,
mayor of Vashon
yeah.
Island is currently a llama, actually. But so I don't know, it's something like that. So
Ben lives on Vashon across
yeah,
from Seattle.
the island where I live is part of unincorporated King County, so we don't have a mayor. So there's an informal process of electing a mayor, which usually results in a farm animal being elected mayor, which probably these farm animals do less harm than most human executives, right? But they're certainly cuter. But I mean, but we also don't have RoboCops roaming around harassing the homeless on Vashon Island. But I mean, in seriousness, I mean, you could have individuals living in the city, I mean, vote to have some of the local budget spent on AIs and robots that help the homeless. And, instead of child protective services going around to take away people's kids for no good reason. I mean, you could have AI providing like useful parenting assistance to low income people who are overwhelmed with their lives, right? I mean, there's a lot of good that could be done with budget.
You have to fund all this
not,
stuff, though.
Yeah.
We have
you
to get
do,
who's going to pay for it all.
Well, you have.
I mean,
funding.
I want to pay for it all. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying that's what the pushback will be.
You have funding.
You got to make money,
right? But the same money going into making robots that harass people could go into making robots that help.
A lot of the tools that were being developed that weren't ready in the 2000s, ended up before the military and law enforcement because that's because they spent money on it anyway.
They would buy it.
Yeah. So, and they would buy three. If it didn't work, they would just buy more.
So Chelsea, let me ask you a general question. Sort of what do you think are the biggest risks facing humanity in the next few years? Like there's obviously a lot. We've been touching on a lot of different things that could go wrong. What do you think are the scariest and most impending things that could go wrong?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's to say, it's separate and apart from artificial intelligence, ultimately, which is, it is the climate. It is the fact that, I am not of the opinion that we're in a prevention mode. We're in a mitigation of damage mode over the next few decades. It's not going to be catastrophic, world-ending sort of cataclysmic events or anything like that, but the alteration of society of a globalized society, just like with COVID-19, sort of like impact, like hitting a globalized society in an interdependent society, shifting to one that is a bit more disparate and a bit more broken up. Whenever the dependency models for supply chains are so finely tuned, how, like, what does that shift look like, and who loses, who doesn't luck out on the supply chain lottery is, I think, going to be the largest impact. And I think AI plays a role in that. and it plays, and who has access to artificial intelligence plays a role in that, and access to like digital devices and things like that. But I think ultimately the societal changes that happen as the climate worsens and deepens the rifts throughout society is the biggest thing that's going to lead to us as we could definitely go through a Bronze Age collapse style scenario. I really do think. I mean, it wouldn't be the end of humanity, but I think we could go back to a 19th century sort of situation.
Interesting.
Just 19th century with AI and iPhones.
I share some of those worries and not others, because I'm a little more Kurzweilian in that I think we're going to get superhuman AGI within the next decade, and maybe the next 5 years even. So then I don't think there will be decades for this damage to play out. I think if we didn't get to superhuman AGI, that could well happen.
I'm just not sure what a superhuman AGI can accomplish that we have that human society can't fuck up either.
Well, I mean, if I think about an AI 10 times as smart as us, I mean, we can do a lot of things that dogs, pigs, and monkeys cannot imagine, like flying airplanes and use the internet, right? So I mean,
yeah, for sure.
So I'm not so worried about that, although others are, and they're not entirely irrational. I mean, one thing, of course, that could go wrong is the super AGI just decides helping people solve the problem isn't that interesting, and just moves itself up to a space satellite, starts solving math problems or contacting the other dimension, and leaves us to our own mess. But the thing I'm more worried about is mayhem that could happen in the intervening period. Like I spent a lot of time in Ethiopia. I've had an AI office there for 10 years now. We just had our 10th anniversary of that office. And I mean, if there's no more jobs working for the global economy in Ethiopia, there's certainly no money to give basic income to the 100 million people there. I mean, they can subsistence farm. Talk about you're not going back to the 19th century. Most of the people are still there, right? But they can't afford prescription medication. They can't pay their phone bill, right? They can't pay their electric bill if they have electricity. So then what happens, right? And as you pointed out, people who are shut out of the system tend to get disgruntled about it. Well, here you've got, potentially a couple billion people who could become much, much poorer if they have no more way to work for a living. But they also have internet access, right? So I mean, there's a lot of things that could go wrong, even if it's 5 or 7 years to utopia of some form. There's a lot of things that could go wrong in that time frame. So what if you have part of the world reverting to subsistence farming and other parts of the world getting universal basic income based on robotic, enabled productivity?
Yeah, but who's growing their food is the question.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well,
that goes back to the supply chain, and I think that is the all of these sort of technologies and all these sort of utopian ideals and things like universal basic income and things like that, they're still dependent on a globalized supply chain that we got used to in the 20th century, that we built and developed in the 20th century, and is going to be tested quite significantly by the climate. And I don't think that there's not really a technological way around that, because
there is actually. So I mean, I know a bunch of people working on sort of vertical farming companies, right? So I mean, you can make a box.
Yeah, but you have to build it. You have to actually get the government to invest in construct, or companies to invest in something like that.
Well, Dubai government, UAE government is investing heavily in this. So I mean, if you could envision a future where AI is controlling the mines, AI is controlling the factories, and you're just building these vertical farming boxes that grow food, and you can just
you still have to get the food to the people, though. You need the
Well,
supply chain.
Yeah, I
I
think that we can work that out. I think that can be worked out.
That's what the drones are for, Lisa.
Yeah.
The drones are flying
And
it. The drones are flying it from the hydroponic vertical farm box to the people. I mean,
to each person's front door.
Yeah, or their back door. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess the point is the technologies actually do exist. It's a matter of cost and scalable manufacture, which are things that an AGI quite plausibly could solve. Actually, if it's just scaling up manufacture more cheaply.
Given one of the problems that I've sort of that I've seen and encountered in the AI space in general is often has to do particularly with bias. You know, like obviously there's been this whole discussion about bias in these technologies, and it's you know, if we get to a point where we're building an AGI, well, you know, like how do we know it's not just a toxic redditor that wants to purge society of certain undesirable groups of people? And
so I actually think that's the problem. I understand why
there will be one of those, right? How can we stop it?
I understand why people are worried about that, because it's a real concrete problem at this exact moment.
Yeah,
I don't think that's an incredibly hard problem to solve using, say, neural symbolic AI technology that's not too far off from what we have now. I mean, I think you could. While there's a lot of toxic bullshit on the internet, there are, in the end, other examples also. And I mean, I think someone can curate a training corpus of the 1% of the internet that consists of people being, you know, ethical and reasonable with an advanced level of consciousness, and not.
Yeah, I think that corpus has already been collected.
Yeah, and you can fine tune language models based on that. And again, with the exact current language models, it's going to be a bit shallow, like just parroting back stuff that sounds rational and well balanced. But I think it's a tractable research program to make AIs that can do genuine ethical reasoning and can be more well balanced and less biased in what they're saying. Now, doing a perfect job of that isn't possible, and people don't either. And our notion of what constitutes a perfect job changes year on year, right? Like, I mean, right now in the U.S., it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be trans, and in my childhood,
well, wait a minute.
Well, so I grew up in the 19. Well, Lisa, I grew up in the 70s, right? My mom is gay, and growing up in the 70s with a gay mom, like, you got the shit beat out of you all the time. We got our car turned over. We got bottles thrown through the window of our house. Like, we got so much shit then for being a gay family, and now I don't see that day to day in the U.S. Yeah. Like, my mom is still gay with the same partner, and you can go into a restaurant holding hands with your wife as a woman, and no one will beat you up, and they'll serve you food. So that's what I mean.
Right, and in Seattle,
on what state and city.
In Seattle, it's not going to be against the law to be trans and try to get your treatment, but in like 20 other states, they're already legislating that.
If you go into sub-Saharan Africa, you will be beaten to death for being openly gay in the street, right? But I guess I misspoke by saying it's okay, but what I should have said is it's vastly more okay. It's vastly more okay than it was in my childhood. Like, it's a humongous difference, right?
It's actually starting to feel like it was like how it was before our childhood. You know, these laws are going beyond.
Well, I mean, this goes back to the you know, the sort of core issue, which is the sort of centralization. You know, the current centralization of these of this technology is, and you know, like if we're moving towards the building of an AGI like infrastructure or an AGI like apparatus, you know, who does it benefit? Who how much
Yeah.
autonomy, like
Well,
who like human like are humans autonomous? Like do humans maintain autonomy?
yeah.
Is there a
So I
hierarchy?
guess
Is there a structure?
the point I was trying to make before I fucked up that topic, the point I was trying to make was maybe 20 years from now, it will be considered horrible to advocate eating meat, right? Because like you think
Yeah,
about like what do we do now? What do we do now that we take for granted is okay that in the future might just be considered
yeah. 30 years
horrible
ago, it was
and
pretty
beyond the
typical to smoke
pale.
cigarettes.
Right. So now,
Yeah.
I mean, I eat meat. I'm not vegetarian. I have mixed feelings about it. Like when I see a factory farm, I think, fuck, I should never eat this meat again. Then I just go and eat a hamburger and anyway, right? But so once we get lab grown meat that tastes as good as regular meat and
Just as good. Yeah.
is cheap to produce, which clearly will happen. I mean, then no one's going to eat meat anymore, and everyone will probably take it for granted. Like, how did these barbarous people slaughter all these conscious thinking, feeling animals to get food? And
But you can
then,
still pay for it on the black market. Corey has this in some of his books. Corey
yeah, right.
Doctorow.
But
You
then,
still pay for it.
if you had an AI that spoke positively toward killing animals for food, that will be considered like a horrible AI that should be squashed, right? So I mean,
It'll get canceled.
so the thing is, when we say we don't want an AI that's biased, we means we want an AI that matches the way of thinking that we have right now in our particular subculture right now, right? Which
Yeah.
is
Right.
not.
But Ben, this goes to your idea though of raising an AGI from a toddler as opposed to waking up with all these superpowers and being a sociopath instantaneously, right?
You want to
I mean
become a
that.
sociopath more gradually, like the rest of us do.
Well,
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well,
No,
you
there's,
I
might
mean
have a
you want.
chance.
I've had this sort of like, because like whenever people ask me about like consciousness, and because like I don't necessarily think that an AGI has to be conscious, like my own personal perception, but whenever it comes to consciousness and self-awareness, I've found the concept of consciousness or self-awareness in a computer to be quite a scary one, because I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a machine that's created by these biological meat sacks essentially out of nowhere, and this just I am born as a Frankensteinish entity that has all these superpowers.
That's a very human
enslaving it used for
perception to
our
think of it
Yeah.
that
entertainment.
way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Even slavery is a human perception. It's not necessarily gonna understand that. I mean, this is the whole pissed off robot slave thing, right?
Well,
Like,
Yeah.
I think.
it,
Well, yeah, I remember in the book.
so we'll give it a body.
There's a book called Being No One, which is a sort of neurophilosophy book written by a German cognitive scientist, and I mean, the main part of that book is trying to understand how consciousness works in the human brain by studying the consciousness of people with various neurological lesions and so forth. Thomas Metzinger is the author, but he posits there he thinks it will be unethical to create AGI because of the conscious experience of all the defective AGIs you have to go through to get to the real one. Like each buggy system that you build and then delete, and then build the next buggy system and then delete. What's that system's conscious experience while you're building it, debugging it, and then deleting it? How do you know what
Right.
subjective hells it's going through, right? So I mean,
There's a lot of anime about that.
That begs a question
about that
though.
scenario. Actually,
yeah. The AI it can't
know,
quite get out the words "kill me, kill me, kill me," but that's
or,
what it's feeling the
or
whole
it
the whole
does,
way.
or there's one where it's like the mother, it's the body of, it's the scientist's mother that is the robot that's being revived, and she does eventually decide that she's going to help kill her. But these are all the future scenarios that we have.
There is that aspect. On the other hand, you could also come to the conclusion that raising human children is an unethical thing to do, because I have 5 kids, 3 are grown up, 2 are little, but I mean, every time you're going to screw up your kids in some way or another, in spite of your best intentions. Like you can't help it. Like parenting is
Right.
it's an unsolvable
Right.
problem. Like
But
you're
the
gonna
point was
you're gonna
that
do
they might
something
be less
wrong.
fucked up
You're gonna do something
Well,
wrong. They're gonna be pissed
if
off
you
at you
raise
about
them.
once they grow up. So you can't like
Yeah.
you
But
can't
you're
not
going off on a
embark on
funny
something
tangent.
because something will go wrong, right?
Well,
Talk-
here this begs I think the deeper question, which is, you know, like the one that I sort of make the assumption that artificial general intelligence, an AGI, does not require self-awareness. It does not require consciousness of any kind. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't agree on that one, but it's hard to resolve.
That's part of the point, I thought. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm somewhat panpsychist, so I think this paper cup has its own experience, and if you take that philosophy of consciousness, which is the most common one on the planet, but not the most common one among, I guess, tech geeks in the U.S., but it's sort of implicit in Indian and Chinese philosophy and so forth. If you take that perspective, then the question would be, what sort of conscious experience does the AGI have? Then the question is, if the AGI has a roughly human-like cognitive architecture, will it have a roughly human-like conscious experience? And what are the
We can't
nuances
know.
there? What are the
We
nuances
can't
there?
know, right?
Well, we
what
could
its
know,
experience
but
is going to be.
we
How could we ever
don't
know?
have that. We don't have that science of consciousness yet, and it may be by experimenting with AGIs and brain-computer interfacing that we get that science of consciousness, right? Like, if you can wire your brain into the brain of the AGI, I mean, then you'll get a direct sense of what it's like to be that AGI. But when we can't have yet. So I think the science of consciousness will get fleshed out as we build the AGIs, and it's going to be hard to figure in advance.
So which is it? Are we building an AGI or are we building a cyborg? That's the question.
We will build both, but the AGIs will be a quadrillion times smarter because, I mean, having to give equal weight to the human part of the cyborg's mind will constrain how smart the cyborg can be, because it has to wait for the brain.
I've always sort of asked this question as well, which is like what does it mean to be smarter? What does it mean to be smarter, like in the sense, like, because like we already have we essentially have super intelligent LLMs are a super intelligence. They're a form of it. They're not that they're very special. They're a highly specialized form of it, but are they smarter, or
well,
not?
So if you go to,
they're not smart at all.
You go to theory of AGI, Marcus Hooter and Shane Legg defined general intelligence in a way I don't fully buy, but it's a worthwhile definition. I mean, they basically define it as the ability to achieve arbitrary computable reward functions in arbitrary computable environments, right? And that's very limited, because a lot of what humans do isn't about achieving a reward, but it's a thing that, and you can see we're not very good at it. Like, I can't prove an arbitrary math theorem. I can't run a maze in an arbitrary number of dimensions. And if you look at a current LLM or any other large neural model, they can really only do things that are pretty close to things in their training data. So they seem smart because their training data set is huge. Now, if you go to, say, Weaver, David Weinbaum's theory of open-ended intelligence, he conceptualizes intelligence as a combination of two things: the ability to preserve your own boundaries as a system in a variety of conditions, and the ability to self-transform and transcend yourself and become something radically more than what you were. And these two somewhat compatible, somewhat conflicting drives to individuate and self-transcend, you could see as underlying evolutionary intelligence, right? And I think in both those ways, both the maximize arbitrary computable reward function sense of intelligence and the individuate and self-transcend conception of intelligence, which is open-ended intelligence, I think you can see humans are not the ultimate end game, and neither are LLMs, right? It's not hard to envision how to go.
Wait.
Not hard
LLMs
to envision how to go way beyond the human level.
That's all they can do, right?
Yeah.
No, they can
write.
You can talk.
They can write.
They can write software. They can make
because
music.
software is a language. Because
They can
music
make
is a
music
language.
because music is a language. But on the other hand,
Right.
the laws of physics are a language. So our entire universe is a language. So
Well,
that's
no, again, you're
Well, no, we we
yeah,
we
I
we,
was
we
trying
create
to
a
make a
language. We
different
create a
point
language
about
to interpret
LLMs.
our understanding of the universe.
Yeah.
So it's our symbolic interpretation of physics, because we don't know how many
Yeah.
dimensions there are, etc.
I mean, I think, Lisa, the limitation of LLMs is not so much that they can only do language or only output sequences of symbols, because you can
And the
encode
underlying
any.
technology is based on the training data. Like the actual
Yeah,
large the models themselves can be
that's the
changed.
limitation. I mean, the limitation is that these algorithms, by their nature, cannot leap too far beyond their training data, and that's the limitation of the transformer neural net architecture. And until that limitation is overcome, you're not getting to AGIs. But yeah, so going
Yeah.
going back. So,
So
Chelsea, the last question I asked was, what are the biggest risks we face? So the follow up to that, after all that entertaining rambling, so we've talked about what are the biggest risks that we face. The question would then be, what are some concrete things that we could do to help minimize those risks? And I think data verification, which Lisa wants to talk about,
Yeah.
is
I
part
do,
of
and
that part of that
so does
story.
Grace. Grace, I believe you had a question about that.
Yes. What do you think are the most effective ways to use cryptographic tools to verify information in an information-rich environment?
So we live in this world in which we have all of this, in which we are deluged constantly with information now. Like we're the average person doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't stand a chance with the amount of information that they're being deluged every day. It's far more than any humans have ever encountered before on a daily basis, especially if you have a broadband internet access every day, and you're on your phone and you have access to social media and news outlets and things like that. And humans are really, really, really bad at being able to verify the authenticity of information. Otherwise, scammers and con artists wouldn't be pervasive throughout society, throughout history. And I think that information verification is the biggest challenge that society is going to be facing for the next few decades, more so than access to information, because people often ask me about the difference about like, oh well, you're somebody who specializes in sort of secrecy versus transparency. I'm like, like, so that's a 10-year ago problem. We're not in the we're in an age where we are in the age of radical transparency, and now it's being able to determine which information sources are valuable, which information sources are authentic, which information sources are going to be the most effective that we can get. And with AI and generative AI sort of muddying the waters even more, with this sort of specialization and its grasp over human language and human interests, we're at a sort of crossroads where, how do we know, or where we can essentially be gaslit at all times? We live in the sort of Baudrillardian extreme right now, and that extreme is very immediate. And so I think that cryptography is an interesting sort of workaround, in my opinion, because one of the advantages that we have with cryptography over AI is that and I find it funny because like we're both dealing in maths, but the math is the maths are at opposite ends, are essentially at opposite ends of the spectrum, where the one limitation that artificial intelligence has is that it can't skip the process of getting around the second law of thermodynamics, which is which is the advantage that the modern day cryptography has, which is that it requires an enormous amount of compute power to break encryption and to get around it, and to find workarounds, and to find ways mathematically of getting past it. And so, at least where we are and where we are in our understanding, so I'm talking 2020s, 2030s sort of scenarios here, in which we can perhaps, and I think that we're at a time in which we can perhaps begin to start to think of distributed, decentralized sort of means of authenticating, the sources of information, the value of information, and so forth. Because we're no longer in an era where it's access to information. It's now sorting it and filtering it and identifying which information sources are valuable. And right now, we've only so far had corporate filters, and that have sent us down very, very scary directions in terms of like the information that people see on TikTok and whatnot. So
Yeah,
that's my sort of sense.
No, it's all super important because I mean, if the alternative to big tech and big government controlling AI is for democratic, decentralized, participatory mechanisms to control AI as it moves from narrow AI toward AGI, right? Then I mean, we need real information to be in the minds of these democratic participators, right? And if people are voting or otherwise participating to guide the mind of the AI in a way that's based on total bullshit that bears no resemblance to reality, and that people are spoon feeding them for their own ends, I mean, then obviously democracy will work even worse than it does with accurate information. And the technology is there to solve these issues, right? It's just like rolling out stuff is so hard. Like with deep fakes, I mean, it's not that hard for like every camera to watermark a picture, and like this picture was taken in
Exactly.
this piece of hardware right here. That encrypted watermark is put in the picture. Then picture viewers can validate whether it was real or not. Like that doesn't need AI. It's not incredibly difficult. It just needs cooperation among people making hardware and software. But I mean, Tufi Saliba, my partner on Hypercycle, was pitching that to Interpol quite some years ago. It's just so hard to get these ideas through people's heads and to get these things rolled out.
Well, what we need to do is we need to make it a default feature of the iPhone camera. That's how we do. That's how we get it through that's how we get it to percolate through society.
Maybe. I mean, so far, what seems is the Android ecosystem is innovating faster than iPhone. But I mean, somehow, yeah.
That's because Android doesn't have the limitations of hardware and the hardware stack.
Yeah. I've been very happy with this new Android phone here. That's
nice.
That's pretty cool. It's like a Pac-Man ghost. Right?
Yeah.
I think this is part of the general problem, though, that technology is advancing, on this exponential rate, and the pace of government regulation is much slower, which is usually a benefit, but sometimes is bad in those cases where government benefit would do good. The pace of adoption of standards is also quite slow compared to the advance of technology, which is a quite bad thing, right? Because there's so many ways in which adoption of reasonable standards across the whole tech ecosystem would be for everyone's benefit. But that's just like years and years and years. And in the meantime, you have an AI revolution every 6 months.
Hey, I think Grace has a question about this for you, Chelsea.
Yes. What do you think are the most effective ways for governments, academia, civil society, and the tech industry to work together to regulate AI?
Oh, that's a great question. What will it take? I think that AI seems to be having more of an impact on how government is operated already than the other way around. I think that ultimately one of the problems with regulation is that you can't depend on regulation, because regulation can be thwarted. It can be bypassed. It's only as effective as the sometimes and often toothless organizations are to enforce them. And to write good policies and not carve out exceptions and things like that. So I'm generally like, while I'm supportive of regulatory frameworks to set the tone and to talk about the discussion of these things in culture and society, and to create frameworks for legal interpretation for court, for sort of courts to examine, for society at large to have sort of standards. The actual my expectations of them having any actual tangible effect throughout society are relatively limited. So while I'm supportive of regulatory frameworks, whenever it comes to AI, I'm very skeptical that the regulatory frameworks will be able to sort of prevent people or discourage people from engaging these kinds of behaviors and tools.
No, I mean, you see the regulatory capture we have in the financial sphere, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
when you have, it's not that financial regulations don't prevent some bad things and some forms of frauds and scams. On the other hand, they also sanction and protect other forms of frauds and scams, like the ones that make Wall Street money, and they try to block a lot of useful things that would provide value to everyday people, right? So I mean, it's yeah. Unfortunately we don't have a really robust like participatory democracy framework
Are we going to end up with
beneficial regulation.
with sort of AI research islands where anything goes, and and servers that are able to access these places, like these sort of like
Well,
these
yeah,
havens,
what we're doing now in our hypercycle project, which is this ledgerless blockchain customized for AI, we're doing now, we're talking to a bunch of folks running crypto mining farms about how to, what GPU servers they should buy to turn portions of their mining farms into AI server farms. So then we're talking to the government of Paraguay about doing this because they're building this huge server farm next to this dam they have on the Brazilian border. So yeah, there's a potential outcome where you have crypto mining farms, which could be in Paraguay or Turkmenistan or wherever they are, right? They're running AI nodes on decentralized AI networks. And these, in effect, are not going to be very heavily regulated in running AI, just as they're not heavily regulated now in running crypto, right? So there's
yeah.
an interesting concrete path to that, in that you have these server farms set up in all sorts of random jurisdictions for mining crypto that can be used for running
Yeah.
AI.
I've had the luxury of being able to talk to both the folks with two decentralized sort of AI research projects, which are the Jensen people and the BitTensor folks.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious as to like what people's thoughts are on the feasibility of sort of competitive, decentralized AI tools that allow for sort of parallelization and things like that. But like Lincoln with a governance model and things like that, like you would see with like some of these. Obviously, you have utility reward token systems associated with these, and I think that's the primary driver for them. But I mean, in the long term,
Yeah,
whether or not we can
doable, right?
decentralize the access.
So on a pure software level, we have portions of the tech stack you need to do everything for modern AI in a decentralized way, and some portions are still being completed, right? So like Singularity Net, which has been one of my big pursuits the last few years, it's a sort of decentralized multi-agent system for multi-agent AI systems. So you could use that for federated learning and large neural networks and logic engines and so forth. We have NewNet, which is a tokenized scheme giving reward tokens for contributing processing power to decentralized AI network. And we have Hypercycle, which we are still building now, which is it's a ledgerless blockchain, which like pure peer-to-peer blockchain, which is very low cost, like high throughput transactions. So the bottom line is you do have that tech stack. It's still more awkward to use and in the end more expensive to use than just putting everything on your own big server farm, right? I mean, just by the nature of it.
Yeah.
Now, if you can get broader participation in that network because it's decentralized and through using tokenomic incentivization and because it's it's open, so it can be customized to do more and more things of local interest to more populations. Like, so if you can get more human input into that system as it grows, then that's an advantage over big tech companies. Now, what we're actually trying to do in SingularityNet ecosystem is launch our own AI, which is based on a framework called OpenCog, launch our own AI on this decentralized platform. But that's sort of the conjunction of two somewhat distinct things, right? So my thinking is, if we can launch a system that's, 2, 3, 5 times as smart as ChatGPT, however you're measuring it,
Yeah.
and we can happen to launch that on a decentralized platform, right? Then you're doing something very interesting, because people will use it because it's smarter, and they don't mind that it's running on a decentralized platform. Just like they use Stable Diffusion because it works, they don't mind that it's open source, right? They don't necessarily use it because it's open source. So if you happen to launch the next best, smarter thing on a decentralized platform and it works, then suddenly you've worked a miracle, right? Then you've got everyone running their AI systems on a decentralized platform. So that's what we're aiming to do in SingularityNet, but it's not so much because the decentralized platform is better. It's because we think we have a better way to do AI by bringing neural together with symbolic and evolutionary methods, and we happen to want to deploy this AI on the decentralized network, right? And so that if that works, then you have the smartest AI in the planet that happens to be running on a decentralized network. Then you use the tokenomic incentivization mechanisms to incentivize people to build apps that run on your decentralized AI, right? So that's
fascinating.
That's what one way that things could go. That's what we're trying to do in SingularityNet ecosystem. That Grace, that is what we hope will underlie the next upgrades of your brain over the next few years. So you'll be clever enough to interrupt me while I ramble on.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to go back to this thing we were talking about before Ben got here, which was we were talking about LLMs and the danger, even though they're not sentient and they make shit up all the time, because they give the appearance, the hallucinations, yes, and they weren't really meant to be used like Wikipedia or something, but people are using it that way, right? Incorrectly. Even the Internet Archive had a tweet that was like, when you're asking ChatGPT for information, do this. And I'm like, no, don't ask ChatGPT for information, right? That's where we're at. And you brought up something called heaven gating.
Right, or locking or sort of heaven banning as well. So there was this concept that people were talking about in user experience in social media, user experience spaces, like 3 or 4 years ago, which at the time was very hypothetical. Like, it was this hypothetical scenario of, can we take a banned user, somebody who is too toxic to interface with social media, but still take advantage of their engagement by exposing them only to essentially bots, in which they're bots that are carefully programmed using what one could assume an LLM based sort of infrastructure to essentially keep them engaged, to keep them on. And, even if they're going down a radicalized path or something like that, their social media interactions are only with interactions who aren't, that they interact with, but it doesn't
nobody else can see them.
But nobody else can see them. So they live in this essentially gaslit little controlled containerized space.
It's like muting trolls and giving them fake responses so they think people can see them.
Right?
They don't know. Yeah. But so that begged the question, because in terms of psychological manipulation, we were talking about this with David Bren, right? In terms of, once we have AIs, they don't even have to be AGIs. They could be AIs talking to us, getting our social cues, depending on what their goals are, we will be very easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
And if we actually think that they're a thing that's thinking and not just, what Rachel called the weighted hash table brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And humans
then-
are very gullible. I've learned this in my
Yeah.
experience.
I think I think actually, if you got the chatbots good enough, especially like give them a human face like Grace has and so forth, and
yes.
I think
this is not a picture of a person. Like
I think many toxic people would actually get a kick out of pissing out chatbots and avatars.
They already are. I've heard
they
this
already
from
are.
Yeah.
And they're going to be doing a lot more of it for the election. That's the problem,
right? That's in the end. That's just like punching a punching bag.
We're going into
someone in the head,
show.
right? So I think that's
yeah.
It's interesting.
It all seems quaint, doesn't it? Those funny old things we used to think about. Is it okay to punch a Nazi? I mean, and now we're like,
I never thought about that. I don't know.
Is it okay to make? Is it okay to is it okay to make a video making a politician, say something horrible the week before their election? I mean, these are the real. What it's going to mean is that no one's going to believe anything. Is what it's going to mean. I think.
We've already had societies where this happens. I'm thinking of the middle years of the Soviet Union and Pravda. Where people knew it was all fake and false, but they. Society.
I mean, we're sort of there already, Lisa. Though.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to people with a variety of political views, like if you show them concrete evidence that contradicts one of their statements, a lot of times they're just like, well, whatever that might be made up. I'm not going to accept that. Like the fact that something could be a deep fake or a fabrication is just an excuse not to pay attention, right? And I think
that's what I'm saying. You're not going to pay attention to the real stuff either, not to the extent that it's going to happen during this election.
That's already the case.
Yeah.
Right now. Right. I mean that's sort of the reality of.
Can it get any worse?
Yeah, it can get.
I'm talking about something more literal. Yeah. Like there's a debate the night before. And the next morning, there's clips of everything, and you literally can't tell what clips are actually from the debate and what are fake.
Oh, I've already seen this.
My point is that's already here. That already happens. Yeah.
Well, it already happened, like maybe with one video, one thing, but I'm talking about the magnitude. I think that is going to be.
Yeah, it's not the default case, but it does.
It will be.
Yeah. Definitely happens, and I mean, I think that's been happening for quite a while, though. Like people who pay attention to Trump's social media or something don't really care if the various things he forwards are real or are made up. And they
Chelsea, what are you?
I have a hot take here, which is, I think that I'm actually a little less concerned about this stuff than I was 3 or 4 years ago. And the reason why is because I think that we've sort of reached a demand peak for information that fits within our cognitive biases. I think people can and they do get exhausted. I think that society can and does get exhausted. I think that while we're not developing while there certainly are going to be portions of society that are exposed to misinformation and disinformation on a regular basis and are susceptible to cons and AI and like AI augmented misinformation, disinformation that's more specialized to them. I do think that the information economy is kind of reaching a peak. And then it may actually, for social media in particular, I think social media is in decline. I think that it's peaked. I think that it's in decline, and it's not going to. It's going to be a part of the fabric of society for moving forward, but I don't think it's going to have the same impact or the same level of meteoric rise of and shockwave effect that it has had over the last few decades. And I think that I think that's my hot take, is that I actually think we're developing a little bit of immunity, just like a social human nature immunity And that's not necessarily a technical one. I still think that we need technical means, but I think that my hot take is actually that I think that we've reached the peak of the effects of misinformation and disinformation for now.
So what I think, a couple quick comments on that. I mean, I think certainly the big monolithic social networks are in decline, but the phenomenon of people spending most of their time using the internet to socially interact with other humans is not in decline, right? It's just going to be done by some other. It's going to be done by some other conglomeration of software, which will then also be controllable by large corporations and governments in some way. The other thing is, if you're right that people have reached saturation on explicitly being fed stuff that matches their point of view, the natural thing to next come after that will be simulations of diversity and balance, right? Which is what journalists naturally do. Like when you write a journalistic article, you have to pretend to give a pro and con on the thing, right? And pretend that you're being balanced.
A good point.
So then what will next happen is, instead of just being fed stuff that matches your point of view, you'll be fed stuff that matches your point of view, and then you'll be fed stuff that pretends to challenge your point of view a little bit to give you the feeling that you're stepping outside your bubble, but without really bringing you outside your bubble in any fundamental way. Right?
That's an interesting argument. That's an interesting argument. I hadn't really thought
and then
of
it
that.
will be AI. It will be AI controlled by companies and governments that figures out how to give you that illusion.
Yeah, because like
balance,
you know, like
right?
I know from like interviews with trolls, for instance. I went on this whole thing where I was like talking to people who are internet trolls and some semi-professional internet trolls, and they get a thrill through arguing with people. And so they will seek out people who have a differing opinion. They don't want to just be around people who they agree with. They want to interact with people who they disagree with, just to spar with them, just to get into
but they want to pretend that they're just wondering, and they just
asking
trying
questions,
to understand,
but,
and just asking questions.
On the saturation point, what I've also encountered is that people who are and I don't have the data to back this up yet, but I've seen this anecdotally, and I think that it will come out soon, is that people who are in higher income brackets are disconnecting way more. It's almost like it used to be that, you know, people who had higher incomes and higher amounts of free time were spending more time online. It seems to be the opposite is happening now, like where where people, like the amount of exposure that elementary or primary school age kids get is significantly higher than among the general population than it is for the wealthy of that generation, where their parents are literally keeping them away from phones and TV and
for kids, it's true that better educated parents are letting their kids have less time online than less educated ones. Nevertheless, like my 5-year-old has been feeling left out because we haven't let him play Minecraft, and all his friends are just talking.
You won't let him play Minecraft?
Well, I let him play starting like yesterday because I just felt bad because
he's 5. He's like,
I'm an Ender Dragon. I'm a warden, and they're just playing all these Minecraft make believe games, and he doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. But I'd say in the crypto world, it's definitely not true that people with money are spending less time online. Like crypto bros with a lot of money are spending
they're the nouveau riche, you know.
People. Yeah.
I don't think they're the I don't think that they're the owners of small businesses and medium-sized companies that you typically see. I think
it'll be interesting to see if your anecdotal observation holds true. I would say
I've been to people's houses where they have no computers, they have no phones. They literally have your phones. You put your phones in a room in the like living area, and then they're entirely disconnected.
But this is a very small percent of modern society.
So they're even more disconnected than they already are being
Exactly.
rich. It
Yes.
sounds like, right? Because
Yeah.
I'd be like, I wish I could not
or
look
maybe
at my
they got a
phone
brain
for that long.
implant. Maybe they have a chip implant in their brain and didn't tell you, right? So, yeah, you don't
Right,
need
they're
a
all
phone.
Neuralink zombies.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be, I think that it's indicative of, I think, a future trend towards and you, I mean, like it's kind of cliche, but I think that there's increasingly a trend among the wealthier at least New Yorkers and San Franciscans to have a more trad approach to things, as they call it, the sort of
Yeah, I
traditional.
mean, here on
What's
on
trad?
Vashon
What does that
Island,
mean?
traditional
What is
on
trad?
Vashon
Yeah.
Island. It's not a lot of rich people, but people just want to spend time gardening and goat herding and so forth. So I mean,
There's some rich people. There's a
definitely
lot of people
there's a lot of that
hanging around with land that don't seem to have to do a 9 to 5 on that island, right?
There's a lot of people not working full time, and there's definitely an ethos of like spending time doing stuff with your hands and on the land and
Gardening
so
and
forth.
yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
a lot of highly wealthy people, but certainly it's not a lot of lower 10% of income people
Interesting.
either. So yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There's a lot
It's like
of different...
living in paradise with Seattle 20 minutes away.
On the other hand, if you go in Brazil or Ethiopia, which are a couple sort of less
I was just
developed
in
countries
Brazil.
where I spend time, I don't see that trend whatsoever. Man, in China or Korea, everyone is staring at their phone every minute of the day. So it's interesting the pockets of culture that are bubbling up though, and it's certainly educational.
I am fascinated by this, and I think that this is one of the key areas in AI research that is going to be very fascinating moving forward over the next 5 years. Is that global South countries are now having access to they're being able to develop their own sort of Silicon Valley approaches to things, but they're doing it in such a different, they have radically different approaches and radically different ways of sort of thinking about these things that are not just copy paste jobs of what happened in Silicon Valley. That I think that we're sort of at a facet, and in particular, I'm thinking of Brazil, I'm thinking of South Africa, I'm thinking of India, like these global South countries. I think are going to have very different approaches to how they utilize AI than northern and historically developed countries have, as they've become developed countries.
That's interesting. The timing really bears reflection, because again, if we are going to get to AGI in like 3 to 8 years or something, how much time is there for that to happen beforehand, right? But yeah, I think of the countries you mentioned, I probably know Brazil better than the others, and I think yeah, I mean, computer science is old there. There's been a big Linux community there for a long time. But I would say though, in Brazil or in India or in Africa, many brilliant people, and there's resources going into AI, but it's a really practical near term product focus. I would say at the moment, the US and UK have almost a monopoly on allocating substantial chunks of resources to AGI R&D. I mean,
yeah.
West Germany, France, maybe, like Facebook AI Research is a big lab in Paris, but
France has gotten a lot of investment in at least trying to get an exo computer, for instance.
Yeah, but I think if we think that the breakthrough to AGI is going to come through some group of people concentrating effort intentionally on building AGI, this is really happening in US, UK, a bit in France and Germany, right? And then I mean, we have our own SingularityNet team, which is a bit out of the mainstream and is global, and we are in in Brazil, we're in Eastern Europe, we're in Africa as well as Asia. But I'd say the global South heavy focus on immediate practical deliverables. China, the government's really afraid of AGI because they see it will be hard to control, though they're doubling, tripling, like entupling
I'm
down
sure they're
on.
building it anyway. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, absolutely.
they're not. They're not. They're building a surveillance state beyond all
Exactly.
others. They're training large language models. They're not interested so much in systems that can make huge leaps beyond their training data and become autonomous and develop weird new shit. They're not so interested
That's
in that
interesting.
because they're afraid that they can't control and predict it. And they really, the US, for the same reason, I don't think U.S. military will make an AGI breakthrough. They want stuff that will obey doctrine. They don't want stuff that's going to do wild,
Yeah.
new, unpredictable
Well,
stuff.
I think that
Wait a minute.
I,
If we have new and exciting ways of killing people, they're usually into that, right?
well,
No,
no,
because they
I
may
think
not
that
do what they may not
automating
do
it.
what they're told. I mean, you want someone that will
Yeah.
obey what you're told.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I
What
think
were you
that
saying,
I
Schultz?
think that DARPA in particular has been thinking about AGI technologies for quite some time. I think that
Well,
I think that while bigger defense might not have this sort of focus, I do think that I
so
do think that the
I worked a
researchers have,
lot.
yeah.
I worked a lot with IARPA. I might have gotten the first research grant from IARPA. Did a few things with DARPA. We had a grant from DARPA for identifying which U.S. soldiers were suicide risk based on
Yeah.
looking at social media and looking at psychology reports. So there was a shift in DARPA about 20 years ago, I guess, when Tony Tether took
That
over.
could be a positive thing.
There was a
I mean, if they
shift.
actually
Well,
were trying to do positive things for the vets
well,
that were suicide risk.
yeah, the issue with that is we sort of solved the problem, and I think they failed to deploy it widely, which is the
Yeah.
common case. But I think what I was going to say is there was a shift in DARPA about 20 years ago where they stopped funding so much blue sky research. And this happened when a guy named Tony Tether took over leadership of DARPA, although he's been replaced by someone else since then. There was a shift towards stuff where there was a very clear plan for how to immediately deploy that in some agency in the military. So I think DARPA did have a sort of wild ass exploratory.
Yeah, the autonomous vehicle program.
Yeah, I mean, this is how they invented the internet. But I would say in the last 20 years, DARPA has had a much bigger focus on things that have an immediate practical deployment path. They're just not.
I think it's shifted back because I think
it's
shifted back.
Maybe
it's shifted back because there's less of a demand in terms of like assisting in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that DARPA started seeing a resurgence of interest in blue sky projects.
Yeah, that might be. When I was in DC, it was all about Iraq and Kuwait and so forth, right?
I want to make sure that we talk about something that'll be no problem to talk about in 5 minutes: AI ethics.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And the idea. Oh, so Grace, you can handle this. Why don't you start off the discussion? You had a question, right?
Yes. What do you think are the most important elements to consider when it comes to developing a standardized code of AI ethics?
The fact that it's impossible. Yeah.
Now we know Ben's view.
It is impossible.
What's Chelsea's view?
It is impossible to get a perfect to get a perfect thing. But I think that ultimately this is a technical problem at the end of the day, and I think technologists have have a very good grasp of sort of the ethical implications and sort of the decision making limitations on these kinds of things. I like to view as a data scientist and as a researcher, I generally take the opinion that I'm a professional, and that as a professional, I should be held to that I and my colleagues should be held to a standard that does not exist yet, which is similar to or has the impact that has the range of potential societal impacts of, say, a doctor or a lawyer or a judge. And so I think that as researchers, we need to be held to such to such standards, and that we are in the best position to be able to come up with those kinds of things that sort of through a decentralized or democratic means, if necessary and if possible. Otherwise, we're going to have over the next few years and decades, these sort of things imposed upon us by society as we have wider and wider impacts on society. And so I think that while you're never going to get just like you're never going to get a perfectly just court system or a perfectly just any kind of formulation of society is going to have difficulties in sort of governance. I think that governance problems, I think that governance structures and standardization of sort of ethical, wiggly wobbly sort of ethical standards among technologists is going to be a necessity moving forward generally.
I think, yeah, that's clear. I think we need also something a little wishy-washy here. We need the AI minds to be imbued with some form of empathy and compassion for humans. And if they have that mindset, then they can interpret the ethical codes in the right way. And if they don't have a compassionate mindset, they will deploy their intelligence to working around the standards and codes for their own ends. I mean, sort of like making code of conduct for kids or for human professionals, right? Like you can put your mind into working around the rules, and you can always do a good job of it. So I mean, the mindset is probably the most important thing, and then you can have standards as guidelines for compassionate AI minds to follow. And both parts are hard. I mean, getting the compassionate AI minds is hard, but
because we're still trying to figure out what compassionate humanity is really.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, and just as humans are not maximally intelligent, we're not maximally compassionate, right? You could have super compassionate as well as super intelligent.
I've heard some extremely scary utilitarian interpretations of doing ethical systems, for instance, that are based purely. I heard David Pierce make the argument that it should be a purely pleasure maximalist sort of system, and
you will have pleasure.
Exactly.
You will feel pleasure. Yeah. Oh, Grace, you had a follow-up question on that same topic, though.
Yes. What do you think would be the most effective ways to ensure that companies comply with ethical AI development?
So you can make the standards, but how do you get people to follow them? Get companies to follow them?
We bully each other. That's the simple and easy way. We come up with ways of, like it's really the being exiled from doing the career and
for being a bad actor.
Exactly. I think that and this is what happens with doctors. I mean, when you have a quack doctor, they're humiliated. Like they go through this ritualistic process that was developed in the Middle Ages, essentially. To be like, oh well, you didn't. Or even the 19th century of sort of boards and ethical systems. It doesn't mean that they can't that they can't do back sort of
how do you enforce it?
Alley
anyway,
surgeries
you don't know what
things.
they're doing.
Yeah, but like the setting professional standards at least prevents you from having larger harms and larger
I mean it all bombs down to the same problem because
it's worth a try.
It's AI that will help you enforce it. So then you need
that's a scary idea.
You need the AI that enforces it to be beneficial. Right, so it all.
I don't want to get drone striked by AI and for making
not having
gifts.
Enough fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's all right because it will inject you with a soma that will make you enjoy being drone struck.
Oh, of course.
Right? So,
of course, you forgot the soma. All right, cool. Well, look, we are out of time. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you, Grace.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah.